back to another week of Dear Piggy's Python tutorials. And in these videos, we are going to be working on error handling, the regex library, as well as Python string formatting. So those are our three big topics for this week. So excited to have you guys back. Let's get started with error handling. So the thing about error handling is that we need to figure out what we should do with the errors, right? In the past in Python, we've been working on writing our code, making sure that everything works, and debugging our mistakes. But the problem is we can't always control the unknown. So when we're creating a program, a really complicated program, there's bound to be a mistake, right? And when we meet an error like that, we don't want our whole code to just stop and break and give out this bright red, ugly flashing error that sometimes is a little bit vague. And so another part that I want to introduce is user experience. As coders, we want to make sure that our program is as friendly as possible to the users who are using our program, right? And as coders, when we see an error message, we understand what's going on. We can read it and we can use logic to figure out what's going on. But the problem is, for people who don't understand code, this could get a little bit complicated. And so we need to make our program as friendly as possible by making our errors concise and to the point. So let's go to REPLit and create a REPL. Choose new REPL over here, Python, and create our REPL. So the first example is just a triexcept block, and this is how we are going to be working with error handling in this video. Let's say that we want to take an input from the user saying like, how old are you? Asking for the age. And obviously now we're hoping, crossing our fingers, that the user is reading our program and making sure that they actually do enter in a number. And so we cast it to an integer, assuming that they do give us a number in return. So let's go ahead and try that by going into our REPL. Let's say age is equal to input. We use the input function, and in the prompt, we say, please give your age. Now, in order to make sure that we know that this is an integer, we're going to cast it to an integer. And you can take a look at the casting video that I made a couple weeks ago if you're confused about what we're doing here. But essentially, we're just making sure that this, whatever string, whatever type that they give us here, whether it's a string or anything like that, we're going to cast it to an integer if it is able to be casted into an integer. And so we print back out the age. So right now we're running our code. Please give our age. So say I'm 35. I'm not really 35, guys, but we just give 35 back out, and everything is working perfectly. Our code is doing great. Now the problem is, if it says please give your age and I am the user who's not paying attention to the prompt at all, and I think it's asking me for my favorite dessert, and I just go on a long rant of ice cream, donuts, I didn't spell that right, donuts and cookies, now this is going to give me an error, right? And let's say that I don't know what's going on in Python at all. I have no idea what's going wrong, and I see this bright red error. This is not a good experience for me, right? I made a mistake, yes I did, but the program kind of gave me some attitude, right? So let's take a look at this value error right now. It said invalid literal for int with base 10, ice cream, donuts, cookies. So what this is saying is it's saying that you gave an invalid value for your int. Whoopsies, there we go. It's back here. We gave an invalid value. It was asking for an integer, and instead we gave ice cream, cookies, and donuts, and that cannot be changed into an integer, right? So this is where error handling comes in. We use the triexcept block to make sure that we can catch any errors possible. So in this example, we put all the code that we want to execute normally in our try block. So our try block is just essentially all the code that you have there and that you're assuming is going to go right. However, then you have your except block. And in your except block is essentially saying, if I get an error, so if something in your try block up here goes wrong, then it's going to run the except block. So if you get an error somewhere in your code, then it's going to go and run your except block and do whatever you put in your except block. So let's go ahead and do that. In my try block, I want it to run everything that I said, like this, quite normally, and we're hoping that this doesn't give an error. Now, we need to indent this because like if-else statements and functions, everything inside of a block needs to be indented. Here's where the fun part comes in, except. And so what this except does is saying, if we run into an error over here in our code, what should we do? And instead of printing out this error over here, why don't we go ahead and print out, please give, or we can say, invalid number. Please give an integer. So this, I spelled integer right. So this is how we're going to make our experience a lot more friendlier. Let's say, please give your age, and I say chocolate, because I'm craving chocolate right now. Instead of giving me a bright red error like it did previously, it's gonna say invalid number, please give an integer. And now, me as the user, I can take a look at this and I automatically know what's going on now, right? I know, what did I do wrong? I gave an invalid number. What should I do next? I should give it an integer instead. So this makes the user experience so much better, and your code does not just come to a complete dead stop if something goes wrong. That's going to take us to the next part of our error handling section. Not every single error is going to be because we didn't give it an integer, right? There are so many possible errors, so many possible mistakes that could happen, and we don't want it to just print out one error message no matter what we do wrong. So this is where we use except block with specific errors. So we can use more than one except block and specify the error, so that if we get a certain error message, we can print out different error messages depending on what the error actually is. So before we do that, let's go ahead and I'm going to add in this part that says value is equal to 100 divided by 0. Now guys, quick little pop quiz right now. This kind of is misleading sometimes, but 100 divided by 0 is actually undefined. You can never divide by 0. You can do 0 divided by 100, but you cannot do 100 divided by 0. So this is undefined. And automatically when we run our code, it's going to give us an error because you cannot do 100 divided by 0. Now the problem is when we ran our code, you see it automatically tells us that we have an invalid number, please give an integer. But is that really what's going wrong in our code? No, right? Because the problem is that we cannot divide by 0, not that we gave the wrong value, because we haven't even gotten to that part yet. So this error message is very, very misleading. So let's go on to specifying our errors. Python has built-in errors that is already in its program. For example, the 0 division error is where you cannot divide by 0. So we say except 0 division error, and as you can see, REPL automatically pops up because it's a built-in Python error. So except 0 division error, print you cannot divide by 0. And so now if we run our code, we see that you cannot divide by 0. So let's go ahead and think through the computer's process right now. It's saying try this value, and it's the first line 2. As soon as it comes in and looks, it sees that there's an error. And what error is it specifically? It's a 0 division error. So then it's going to come down and look at our except block, and perfect. We have an except block that is specifically for the 0 division error. And then it's going to print you cannot divide by 0. Now, what happens if we comment this out and we want to run the rest of our code? So if we give the wrong value in here, something could also go wrong, yes? So that's how we create another except block. And so if you put the wrong value for lines 3 and 4, if you give a string instead of an integer, that would be a value error. And that is another error that is built into Python. It is called a value error. So keep that in mind, and we can print incorrect value. Please give an integer. So what, guys, am I doing right here? I am taking all of our errors, instead of printing out one general error message for every single thing that we do wrong, I am kind of classifying my errors. I am kind of saying, if you get an error message, go down to your except block and first classify. What type of error is it? Is it a 0 division error or is it a value error? If it's a 0 division error, print out what happens in the except block. If it's a value error, print out what happens in this except block. So now, depending on what is going wrong in our code, we can get different error messages. So since I've commented this out, we will have no zero division error. And now let's run our code again. And we say, please give your age. And let's say I put cherries. I love cherries. They're so good. And then now when I run my code, I get incorrect value, please give an integer. Because cherries is not a number, right? And so that's a value error. So it would come down to this part of the except block and print out this. So essentially, guys, to summarize everything about error handling is that we use the try block to run our code. Okay, guys, Replit is not having a great day with me, but it's okay. We use the except block to catch any errors. We can use specific errors to classify different error messages. So we run our code the way that we want to in our try block. And we have multiple except blocks so that we can print out a different error message for whatever error that we get differently. So guys, that was error handling in this video. In our next video, we will be working on the regex library, which is very interesting as well. I hope you guys understand it. If you don't, please let me know if you have any questions, and we will see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.